Welcome to Talk Retail to Me, where we explore pragmatic solutions to retail's most pressing challenges. Today's episode dives into a pressing issue that could disrupt everything from back-to-school sales to holiday shopping. We're talking about tariff shocks and their ripple effect on supply chain and what it means for retailers and brands now and in the near future. U.S.-bound shipments from China are down nearly 40%. Retailers and brands are already bracing for delays and inventory gaps. The stakes are high. Our retail experts will unpack what's happening, what it means, and what can be done both now and in the longer term. So let's get into it. Today we have Walter Holbrook. We got to know Walt through his daily observations and musings on LinkedIn, usually titled Retail Today and Retail Renaissance. Walt's a former CEO and store operations executive. Walt, what else do you want our audience to know about you?
Probably just my company, my boutique, Yoda Retail, is out there. I'm more than happy to work with anyone on collaboration to move this industry forward.
Also joining us is Amanda Astrologo. Amanda's Parker Avery's Chief Consulting Officer. She's a former retail executive with deep background in planning, buying, allocation, replenishment, and overall transformations. I've personally had the pleasure of working closely with Amanda for over 10 years now, both at Parker Avery and a former retailer that we both worked at. So Amanda, anything else you want to share about yourself?
No, I'm looking forward to today's discussion with these guys. I think it should be fun and enlightening all around. I'm definitely a retailer at heart, so this topic really hits home for me, so I'm excited to talk about it today.
Walt and Amanda and I had the pleasure of meeting in person at this year's NRF show in January. I think we hit it off immediately, both professionally and personally. So yes, this should be a wide-ranging and open discussion. All right, first question. How should retailers adjust their supply chain strategies in response to the sudden decline in cargo shipments from China resulting from new tariffs? What else should they be thinking about there? Amanda, I'll start with you.
Look, I think what we've heard in the market, or even though the shipments are down, a lot of people have pulled up their shipments. They're trying to be proactive and get ahead of the tariffs and bring things in sooner. So I think as people start to think about things, it's not being siloed in the thought process. There's one thing to bring your demand in sooner, but as the consumer sentiment changes over this whole thing, what's the pricing strategy that goes along with it to help people move through their inventory? Where do you need inventory placement? How do you change how you think about it from an allocation and replenishment standpoint? Because the store you thought you were going to send it to might not be the store you need to send it to anymore. And that whole strategy, how you warehouse things, I think it's a very holistic thought process that now has to be ingrained. So whether you're new to a S&OP or an IBP structure or getting merchants to talk to the supply chain, all things are on the table. And I think that getting to think about that whole entire end-to-end process about inventory management is paramount. I don't think you can just think about pulling up demand. It has to be integrated with everything else as you think about your supply chain. So I know, Walt, you've posted a lot about this subject.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Well, I think the question's absolutely horrible to ask. Right? It's extremely difficult. If you're a merchant today, a buyer, or even in finance, the inconsistency that is coming, the direction, the leadership that we're getting on the governmental side has made this an absolute nightmare. There is no game plan here that we can sit down and say you need to do this, this, and this. There are some facts that we do know. Number one, if you're sitting on a lot of inventory, it's worth more today than it was yesterday. So how do you handle that? Do you continue discounting? Are you running a lot of promotions? Are you really analyzing that? Is it seasonable? When you look at this from so many different directions, this is almost a mission impossible for retailers.
Yeah, I think, well, to your point, there is a lot of, I can't even call it uncertainty. It's just wackiness, honestly. And I think the key to me, I mean, yes, this is a tariff situation. It's the same conversation we had during COVID. And I think it's how do retailers be, and I hate using the word agile, but they've got to be nimble, right? And how do you change and be ready for these things? Because this isn't the last time this is going to happen. This is on repeat. This is not a new phenomenon. It's just how do you adjust and what are the triggers that you need to pull to move forward and be fluid? Because you're right, Walt, there's no solid game plan to go in there and say, you need to do X, Y, and Z to deal with this. There's a lot of people talking about tariff game plans and what do we need to do? But at the end of the day, the flexibility in your thought process, the flexibility in your tool set is what's going to help you get through this entire thing, and being ready for it to have those discussions. And I think that to me is probably the bigger question, is how do retailers be nimble and open up the conversations across their organization? To say that these decisions are just going to be holed up in some kind of executive committee without talking to some of the doer bees that are having to work through this, whether it's in their Excel spreadsheet or in a solution, is kind of crazy, because there's work that comes with this. There's work that comes with being nimble and being able to work through this. And sometimes that means you need outside help just because the maturity of your organization isn't there, or you have to give people the grace to say there's going to be mistakes and we're going to have to move through this, and what's the mitigation plan that comes along with it. So, because there's no right answer, but being able to, back off from that is key.
Somewhat similar to the COVID, it's a supply chain disruption. So do you think that a lot of retailers and brands learned a lesson in COVID around that, being nimble, being agile, how to handle the supply chain disruptions, putting tariffs aside? Are they in a better place than they were before March of 2020, or where are they still vulnerable and have challenges?
Well, I'm going to let Walt go first.
You are,
Yeah,
man.
I'm letting you go first.
Did they learn anything? That is such a tough question. I know one of my clients had 2 containers outstanding and scared to death. I said, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to negotiate the tariff real quick. So I got a hold of the 2 vendors. And so, you've got to dance a little bit here. You've got to be able to dance on your feet, because you're not going to take a class in college, or you're not going to find a book where someone has all the answers. It's not happening. So I called both vendors and I said to them, listen, we're a strategic vendor. We have a relationship. It's long going. I want to be grandfathered in on those 2 containers. We bought them. There was no tariffs. So in both cases, they said, well, no issue. We'll handle the tariff. We want the relationship. And I said, going forward, if we buy another container, we will understand that there's a tariff on it, and it's our responsibility going forward. Mm-hmm. So we got away lucky there. I don't know what these companies are doing with thousands of containers like a Walmart or Home Depot. The other thing that we're not throwing in here that we've got to throw in here is the bookings on containers out of China are up 300% last week. So the idea that everything has stopped, that's old news. The good news is it's on a ship and it's coming. The issue for retailers is you've been told that the 30% tariff is such a deal. At 145, impossible. But now we got it down to 30%, and this is such a deal for you. Obviously, who's ever making these comments doesn't understand retail math. And we have someone that says that we're going to give Walmart a lesson in retail pricing. And to me, it's the funniest damn thing I've ever heard of. Because obviously they know nothing about Walmart. Because the Walmart culture is no one is going to sell it cheaper than we are. And we will negotiate you to death. We will squeeze all the expense that we can out of the item. We will help you do that. But we don't just raise prices. I found that a little awkward, to say the least. And now you have to add on, because of the demand on the containers has happened overnight, is on the East Coast, we were paying somewhere around $4,500 for a container. That's now up to $8,000 and $9,000 because the demand has just gone crazy. You know what's sitting in China? You got back to school sitting there. You've got Halloween sitting there, and holiday right behind it. So it's an absolute nightmare for these companies. There's such a deal, the 30%, which is such a deal. And now you double your freight charges, and you're trying to get it all in. And there's a lot of pressure on you not to raise prices. You can forget that prices are going up.
I think the differentiation, when you talk about the difference from COVID, where COVID consumer demand stopped, right? Like, unless you were a home retailer, because everybody wanted to redo everything they were living in. But outside of that, consumer demand was like, oh, stop. We're not doing anything. We can't shop at the stores. That's not the case now. People want to shop. Now it's, how do you offset the tariff with pricing and keep the consumer demand going? Because the part that's making consumer demand slow is price, because the tariffs are getting passed through. It's not that they don't want to buy, like COVID. It's they want to buy it, but they don't want to buy it at 145% more than what they thought they needed before that, right? So from a retailing standpoint, it's how do you balance the inventory, but put it at a price and not completely cut off your nose, spite your face on the price factor and the profitability line. And I think, Raul, to your point, it's math. So we've got to figure out the mathing. And how do you make sure that your core assortments, the bread and butter, the stuff that's making you money, that you protect that? And in some cases, the seasonal items, the one shot, that you may have to take a loss there because you need to get rid of the inventory, because you can't have that on your books. I mean, look, we've all heard the story of the dreaded Christmas trees. Christmas trees are going to be $8 million when it comes for November, right? Like, we know that. It's just because they're all sitting on a boat somewhere and the tariffs are out there. That's going to be a challenge for everybody. But at the end of the day, they're here, they're coming. So how do you price them that it doesn't completely take you off the map? But you got to get rid of the inventory, because come January or come December 15th, you don't want to be paying the taxes on your inventory that are sitting in your store on that stuff, because now you're getting tariffs plus all that other wonderful investment that you get at the end of the year. So I think it's a little bit different than COVID. I still go back to, did they learn anything, Clay, to your original point? I think they learned. Did they all do something about it and be agile? Some did, but some just said, God, that was a pandemic. We don't think it's ever going to happen again. And they, put some projects on hold and went along their merry way. And now they're like, probably should have kept that capital investment. Probably should have invested in something that allows us to be more fluid. So I think there's some realization of that. It's just, how do they get there and complete that?
So we've seen the notices with Walmart and other retailers saying prices are going up. How selective can or should retailers be on price increases? Either how much or how much of their assortment? How can they ensure they're staying competitive? And how do they manage the expectations of the consumer? We mentioned, Amanda, that people do want to shop, but we also hear that consumer sentiment's down. They're being hit hard with economic challenges, not just the tariffs, overall uncertainty around labor, around job market, around inflation. So how much and how should retailers be thinking about price increases?
I'm going to grab that, Amanda, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
I want to follow up to your comment about seasonal product. Mm-hmm. My gut tells me that the big guys will absorb this 30% tariff on seasonal products. There's too much of a risk there.
Yep.
They'll get it in, they'll sell it. And the issue is the pricing is being done in Asia. The labor that it would cost to reprice it all, retail math gets in the way.
Yep.
You're just adding expense to a problem. And I think the other thing where we miss the boat on the tariff is that we don't really see it for what it is, which is a tax. Mm-hmm. It is a tax. The American consumer is paying that tax. Mm-hmm. And no political party today could be alive if they proposed a 30% tax on the American people. So I think that the media has a responsibility here. Certainly the NRF does. And we haven't heard a lot from them on putting pressure back towards the government to relieve the industry. So I think that's an opportunity. And back to the consumer, when 65% of them are living paycheck to paycheck, raising prices, you're going to know rather quickly that you have a sales problem. And we haven't heard a lot about that. Everyone's telling us sales are going to be flat for the year. But what happens when we get to the third and fourth quarter and our margins have taken a hit and our sales have taken a hit, and then all of a sudden we woke Wall Street up? Mm-hmm. Some of the advantage right now is with independents, the non-Fortune 500 companies out there. They can be a little bit more flexible. That Fortune 500 group sitting there, they're just trying to get to the next quarter. So there's a tremendous pressure on them to continue to perform.
When you think about each of those companies, the energy that is being spent on what if scenarios, right? And what if we did this? And how do we do this? So they're taking people away from their day jobs that should be driving sales, evaluating the business. And there's just a lot of emotion and energy being spent on trying to figure this out, and something that changes 24-hour period to 24-hour period, right? So there's a lot of energy being spent on a very big gray ball. So I think the challenge for a lot of those retailers, no matter the size, is balancing that and understanding where they need to go target and how much energy and when do they need to start having those conversations. The price conversation isn't new. If the consumer's not reacting to a certain price, those are conversations you have during an open to buy cycle or a sales reforecast or an integrated business plan. You have to be able to adjust and understand where they're reacting to and where that profitability stays, and be able to reforecast and understand where you've got to take deeper or where you can get some grace. So I think it's how flexible do you want that to be, and how quickly can your teams adapt to that without getting stuck in the mud. The amount of our clients, we hear analysis paralysis. I can't do that because I'm in a tariff meeting, or I've got to go do these 3 what if scenarios because I need to understand what the tariff impact might be on my shipments that are coming in next week. Give yourself a relief line.
We talked about pricing, and Walt, you correctly mentioned that now container traffic is up. It was stalled when the tariffs were really high. They brought it down. Now there's a lot flowing, but nobody knows what else is going to be coming. So a few weeks ago, people were saying, hey, there's going to be empty shelves coming before back to school. Now we know inventory is flowing. We know there's uncertainty. So what else should retailers be thinking about from an inventory flow, inventory management standpoint? Are there things that they need to be doing differently, whether it's forecasting, planning, allocation, replenishment? What else should they be thinking about?
I mentioned this 6 months ago, and that was, you knew this was coming. There's been a lot of discussion over the last political cycle that this was going to happen. So my challenge on my post was, what do you have your merchandise team doing right now? Mm-hmm. Are they looking for domestic sources? Is there flexibility in the planograms? Or have we beat them to death over the years that they can't change anything?
Right.
Come on, we're going to have to get flexible here. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to happen overnight, but I certainly believe by third and fourth quarter, you're going to start to see some real issues on the sales floor, especially if it's not resolved. How do we utilize that sales floor? I'm a huge believer in not misusing the sales floor. So how do you drive sales? And you should have already gotten your merchandise team. If it's me, I would have had them out at all the shows, looking at domestic vendors like crazy, mm-hmm. seeing what new products we could be putting on the shelves for holiday. To me, that could have been turned around to be a positive and a fun adventure of all the new items that we could have introduced to our customers that weren't from, let's say, China. I don't know that I'm seeing that kind of enthusiasm or leadership or direction. I think that may be the missing link here.
I don't disagree. That's exactly kind of what I was going back to. They're stuck in the mud, right? So let's get creative. How do you get in a room and think differently and test the organizations to step out of the box a little bit where it's appropriate? I think the other piece that we've heard from a lot of our clients is, I'm going to call it supply chain visibility, manufacturer visibility. These tariffs are being passed down this wonderful game of telephone with very limited visibility. If you're a retailer that buys in line, you're getting it from a manufacturer who's getting the same tariffs passed down to them from where they source from. So if you don't know where they source all their parts from, then what's getting passed and how do you really understand what it's worth? You know what? At the end of the day, it's finished goods. Concentrate on the finished goods, figure out where you need to put that, figure out what that's worth, because it's going to change tomorrow. and it's going to change the day after that. Give yourself something on the reserve line so that when sales do start to soften, that you've got a release valve. And if they don't, and you're thinking creatively and bringing in new different products, then use it. But be prescriptive about where you're doling out the money and how you're flowing your receipts. Think about your supply chain. I mean, get with your supply chain partners immediately and think about how can you flow it. If you're a pure cross-dock facility and you have to assign your allocations at the port, okay, let's think about how do we put some of those things in a warehouse and do delayed allocations and be better about inventory placement. Those kind of decisions, it's doing something different instead of, how are we just going to price? How are we going to figure that out? Everything's on the table. Let's really start to be creative about how do we think about solving even just a small piece of it, whether it's your core assortment, that is your bread and butter and your margin builders, or it's getting out of the inventory. Walt, to your point, your seasonal product. You don't want to be sitting on a lot of Christmas come, December 15th. So what's the plan to really start to alleviate that and get ahead of it and be proactive?
I think one of the lessons that many retailers will learn from this is I'll just broadly call risk management and risk mitigation. You don't want to have all of your assortment coming from one country or region, you want all of your assortment coming from one supplier. You need to also be looking at how broad your assortment is. If you're going to want to manage risk in your assortment, you don't want too many colors, too many patterns. You want to really think about what is the right size assortment for what you're offering the consumer. What are some other thoughts on how they can look at managing risk, whether it's long-term, medium-term, or short-term?
Well, I think we've been talking a lot about fashion retail here. If we zoom out and say management of risk across all industries, the first place that people need to spend money is grocery. People need to eat. If grocery prices go up, fashion retailers are going to get hit because that's extra, if you will. So I think for fashion retailers, pay attention to the others that are around you. Watch the grocery market, understand where that's going, understand if the consumer sentiment if it has to spend somewhere, if they spend there, what's it going to mean for you? And how do you start to understand those ebbs and flows and the other retail channels that are out there? If they are still spending and grocery continues to be static and be okay, then your risk may be a little lower and you can figure out how to navigate on the fashion front. If grocery starts to suffer in a pretty big way and CPG starts to take a hit, travel starts to take a major hit, fashion retail has got a pretty big hill to climb because then they truly are last on the totem pole and a little extra. So I think that when you talk about mitigating risk, it's looking at the macroeconomic, looking at those others around you and how your business is going to be influenced by how the consumer is having to choose. Well, you spend a lot of time in stores walking around. What are you seeing from that front?
Basically, what you're talking about is needs versus wants.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
This has been going on for quite a while now.
Yep.
This is why Walmart has been so successful the last few years. It's the needs piece. 60% of their business is in grocery.
Yep.
So, man, they're like the perfect retailer for this. Customers' needs, they're focused on it. On the apparel side, the fashion side, I mean, this is truly a nightmare here.
Mm-hmm.
Off-price continues to get stronger and stronger. The pressures on department stores and specialty retailers, it's going to be huge. And I think they're going to have to rethink the whole thing here because that consistency is just not happening. They don't know what's coming tomorrow. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, we were told Apple's going to have a 25% tariff and Europe is going to be 50%. So that's in just the last 24 hours. If I'm a specialty retailer, fashion retailer, I think I'm going to slow down the demands on terms and try to be a little bit more realistic because the product's probably not coming. And if it is coming, it's going to be at a higher price. Yeah. So I wouldn't be so quick to start 50% off discounts, buy one, get one free. The sales may suffer, but at least you'll be able to hold your margins, pay your expenses. And until we start seeing the pressure on labor, then I think we may see some more screaming on the political circles when we start seeing individuals losing jobs. That'll be the real pressure point for people.
I have been seeing more reports of individual or small groups of retail executives actually descending on Washington, D.C. and visiting their representatives and their senators and trying to, build a grassroots movement that way. So I do think that level of activity and noise is going to continue. I also think that some retailers have already good agility in their ability to manage prices. And I'm not talking about managing their margin, but being able to quickly adjust their prices or adjust promotions as they need to in the pricing life cycle. I think other retailers that don't have that level of nimbleness for whatever reason need to be thinking of that as a capability that they should have in the near future so that they can, where they need to, at least have the flexibility to adjust prices as quickly and as easily as they can. Obviously, there's still usually a labor aspect of that people need to think about.
No, that brings up a good point there because we've never had the data that we have today. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And taking wholesale markdowns across a season, that's the worst thing that I think that could happen right now. Go in and dissect those individual issues, take those markdowns, maybe a smaller markdown earlier will protect that margin in the long run.
Yep. I think we've seen that the focus continues on foundational processes and tool sets. In an uptick, data visibility and making sure that your data and your foundation is set, and then merchandise financial planning, just the simple checkbook that people have kept in an Excel sheet, that makes this really hard for you to be able to be agile and work through this if you haven't kept up with that. It's a pretty commodity solution set at this point, but surprisingly, there's still people that haven't invested there and kept up with the speed there. And I think they're feeling that a little bit now. And that's impacting people's ability to make quicker decisions and be agile in that process and make those pricing decisions because they're busy doing what if scenarios in Excel and trying to roll that up across an organization. That takes time, takes a lot of effort. So I think coming out of this, we'll see a continued renewed viewpoint on foundation and systems and processes and tool sets. This is going to happen again. People have to figure out how to continue to get through this with less pain so that they can get to the fun stuff, all the optimization and all these wonderful AI widgets that we keep hearing about, right? But you can't get there unless some of your foundation's set. So I think it'll be interesting to see the continued investment in that space once people start to kind of get out of this tariff fog and figure out how they could have done this better or continue to make better decisions.
We got this far in the conversation without somebody saying AI.
I know, I had to do it though. We would have been totally bored. Walt would have been so upset with me if I didn't say the word AI. I would have heard about it for a while.
Yeah, because the AI is going to fill your counters. I can't wait to see
I know. It's a hot topic for Walt. He's got t-shirts and everything.
You made a good point though on data and foundation, Amanda, and AI, as we've been with clients that are interested in more sophisticated optimization solutions. The first thing we always talk about is data. So I think a combination of agility, nimbleness, challenges like the tariffs, as well as some of the new AI sophistication, I think that's leading a lot of retailers to really rethink how much they need to focus and invest on data and foundation. Yep. I think we're getting close to the end. Walt, any closing comments or thoughts you'd like to?
Well, I think you guys have talked on the being nimble. I would call it probably dancing. The music's on, so keep dancing. I mean, they got to follow the beat here. This is not going to be easy for anyone. I keep thinking about the finance guys.
Yep.
For 2 or 3 generations here, we have taught our organizations, your operators, this is the planogram. There is no flexibility. All you got to do is put it where it belongs, follow the label. And now I think maybe we'll get back to that lost art of merchandising at the store level. And will the finance guys see how important that could be? Maybe a store manager could tell us what we need, or I know a manufacturer down the street, I'd like to put an end cap of his product out. What do we have to lose? I mean, Sam told us years ago, let's go find some made in America product. And I think that's what our merchants should be doing, is looking for things that could go into your set to generate sales and make a margin, and you know where you can get more. And maybe we just lost that. We keep waiting on everything to get better tomorrow, and I'm not convinced it will.
Amanda, any other closing thoughts?
I think the willingness and the ability to think outside the normal. The ability is one thing, but I think there has to be the willingness to go there. And Walt, to your point, not the lost art, but I think it's roles and responsibilities on that side have gotten so rigid. How do you open up the creative juices again to get creative on the supply chain front, get creative on the pricing front, get creative on the merchandising front? Your CFOs, they're trying to figure out how they're going to figure out the balance sheet at this point. When you think about management of inventory, you can't continue to manage it the same way that you maybe did even last week. Our teams definitely hear it from me a lot. Have a plan, but have a B plan and then have a C plan for your B plan. And being able to articulate that and be able to have that somewhere where everybody understands it and can execute to it in a quick and efficient manner is what's going to get everybody through this. But it's not going away. So that game plan and that ability to be nimble and think differently has to be something that gets more ingrained and becomes more of the norm, instead of just saying, we're going to do that for these next 6 months. We're going to get through this tumultuous time, and then we're going to go right back to operating the way we did. You have to take your learnings, build on your learnings, and ingrain them back into your culture in order for it to be sustainable. So for the executives out there, that's kind of the mindset. This is a little bit of a culture shift as much as it is just trying to fix the business today. And you have to look at it in that manner in order to continue to come out of this and grow on the other side versus just going back to a status quo.
One last comment, if I could, Clay, and that is, don't look at it as nothing but challenges.
Yep.
Where's the opportunity?
Great point.
It's a great point, Walt. Man of so much wisdom.
All right.
Too kind. The blind squirrel catches the nut.
My line. All right. A big thank you to Amanda and Walt for sharing insights, and to you, our listeners, for tuning in. If there's one takeaway from today, or a few takeaways, we heard a lot about speed, agility, creativity, and planning for the unexpected. These things are no longer optional, they are essential. As we move deeper into a volatile retail calendar, remember to stay connected, stay informed, stay ready. If you found today's conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, share, and check out our show notes for additional resources. Until next time, this is Talk Retail to Me, your source for clarity in a complex retail world.